the shop went quite dark. It was almost like something was obscuring the sunlight shining in, and I thought it was a van. So as I looked to the door to see what was there, in the door frame is Darren. So he's filling the whole door frame. And I remember looking at him, and as he's pushing the shop door open, I can see a rucksack, and he's putting his hand in the rucksack, and as I'm looking, he's pulling out a gun, and I can see this sawn-off shotgun. He pointed the gun to my chest, told me he loved me, and pulled the trigger. So I grew up in a little place called Newport Gwent, South Wales. Childhood was extremely funny. I was quite a tomboy, always used to be dressed like in wax jackets. I was always quite feisty, always had a strong personality. Always ready to challenge something if I didn't believe it. And I can remember one time in school, in junior school, and we were all as nippers sat around the table, having our food, probably about 7, 8 years of age. And one of the kids said, I'm starving still after the food. And I'm like, yeah, I'm starving too. So I went home, said to my mum, right, this is disgusting. We haven't got enough food. And I said, there was just 3 slices of peach and a dribble of a vat milk. And she said, well, write a letter to the headmaster. Anyway, I did. I wrote a letter, the dear sir, the moment of the Oliver, can we have some more sort of food? And he's like, well, what do you want me to do? I said, give us more food. So they did. They increased the portion sizes. So I've always had a voice and, been sort of out there. And I would say a strong personality.
What was your life like before you met Darren?
So I was a single mum, of Josh, who was 2 at the time. So I was pregnant at 18, had Josh at 19, and then I sort of split up with his dad. So I was a single mum when I sort of met Darren.
And how did you meet Darren?
So his sister lived opposite me in the street where I was living. So I was in like social care housing, and I got friendly with her. And I can remember going over the one day, and her brother Darren was there.
And what was he like on that first meeting?
Charming, really extremely funny. He was a big guy. He was 6'7", and I think at the time he was probably about 18 stone. He was a bodybuilder, but he had a real good personality in terms of wit and humour, which I like. And then I can remember him coming over my house for a coffee one sort of evening, and we were still talking till like 4 or 5 o'clock in the morning. And he told me a bit about his childhood and that his brother had took his own life 4 years prior. So I thought he was quite a fragile, he was sort of quite vulnerable that night. I can remember, opening up about stuff. Within a 12-month, he was living with me. And not long after, I was pregnant then with Jack. So it was quite a quick escalation when I look back on it now. But I think, we think when we're 21, we're all grown up and we know everything about everything, but being a single mum as well, one serious relationship, I suppose, beforehand as a teenager, you just think it's great, don't you? You get sort of swooped up in everything and you just sort of go along. And, he was buying, I can remember it was Easter, and he bought Josh some Easter eggs, so that was a win-win, and yeah, it just went extremely quick. So up until that point, everything was, fine. There was one, looking back now, I can remember one incident where, I'd cooked this lovely meal and he was a no-show. And his attitude was, well, I went out with I think it was with his dad. Can't remember, but he went to town. And I was like, oh, well, that's nice. I've cooked this meal and never showed. But, I didn't think any more of it. But looking back now, it was like, okay, that was the sort of start. How I say about coercive controlling behaviour as I know it now, and this is the best way I can describe it to anybody that doesn't understand it, is if you went out on a date with a guy, say, and he slapped you on the first date, you'd be an absolute moron to go back for a second date. It would be, that's it, But they don't do that. They're very clever. They're very manipulative. So what they'll do, they'll groom you. It's a grooming process. There's no 2 ways about it. It's a grooming process. So then all of a sudden you think, oh, this guy's really, really great, So you're in this relationship. And then all of a sudden he'll slip terms and conditions into your relationship, rules and regulations, whatever you want to call them. And then all of a sudden in this relationship, you've got these rules and regulations, but you're not even aware they're in place. And then all of a sudden you will breach one of these rules and regulations, the terms and conditions, and there's a consequence. And that is not necessarily a slap or a punch or spitting in the face, whatever. This could be just something as simple as 24 hours of silent treatment to you. And then you feel really uncomfortable and you just think, oh God, I'm not going to do that again because so-and-so didn't like it. So you stop doing that. So then before you know it, you've changed the whole way you tick and operate. And then just to pacify this perpetrator, really unbeknown to you what you're doing, and then you've just become an extension of that perpetrator's will. So for me, once those terms and conditions were in place, that was full control for Darren. This didn't happen overnight. This certainly happened, in the first year of our relationship, but I didn't know. I didn't know that. I'd stop going out with my friends. I'd make excuses. My mum would say, I'll babysit for you if you want to go out. I was only 21, 22. And I would repeat what Darren would say. If you're going uptown in a relationship, nothing but a slag. When I did become a hairdresser, for instance, I wasn't allowed to cut a man's hair. So all of a sudden, my whole personality was being suppressed, and I was doing everything to pacify a perpetrator. The first significant moment of the abuse for me was when I was 7 months pregnant with Jack. And again, there was an argument and he came bounding up the stairs and I was in the bedroom, in the corner of the bedroom. And as he came round the bed, he gripped me by my throat and lifted me off the floor. And he told me later that he let me go when my lips turned blue. And people watching this might think, what on earth were you doing staying there after that? It's not as easy as just go. If it was easy as just go, millions of victims would just go. But you're in something where you've got that threat of the perpetrator. And Darren always used to say to me, there's only one way out for you, and that's in a wooden box. I was pregnant, with his child. There was absolutely no escape for me. So when Darren then, after the assault, the strangulation, fell on the floor and cried like a baby. And as I said, he was 6'7". He was built like a brick shit house. The biggest he got to was 22 stone. He had a 60-inch chest. And he's crying and begging for forgiveness. My immediate reaction was like, oh my God, I got to try and help him. He's got loads of issues, thinking about his childhood. He told me he grew up in a violent household himself. I felt extremely sorry for him. So my attitude at the time was, I've got to try and help him. I'll fix him. I can fix him. He is going to be fixable. But, as you go on in the relationship, at the end of it, that some people just cannot be fixed.
Back into kind of the early stages of the relationship, you've just had Jack. How are you feeling in that kind of cycle of coercive control and abuse?
So I was absolutely physically and mentally exhausted by everything, and I just sort of almost, I suppose, went in like an autopilot and just thought, I've just got to basically just get on with it. I've got 2 kids. I got a baby and a toddler, 4 or 5 years of age, and I've got to be doing the nursery runs and everything else. And basically, you just get on and do it. There was an incident I remember, and I can't even remember what it was about, but I can remember, and as I think of it in my head now, I can remember Jack, he was 2 years old, him grabbing me by the hair and swinging me round the kitchen, and I had a pair of loafers on with rubber soles on, and it left a half-moon circle in the carpet, and Jack was by the back door crying, and I can see that image as if it was yesterday. So the violence kicked in pretty quickly because, obviously I breached one of the terms and conditions or answered back or something, So then you're just constantly every day sort of, I suppose, strategically thinking, how am I going to pacify the perpetrator today?
Can you tell me a bit about Darren as a person?
He didn't work full time when I met him. He was just working the door. He liked that power being on the door, throwing people downstairs in nightclubs and stuff like that. He sort of thrived on that. In our community, he was very well known. His bedtime reading would be Donnie Brasco, Al Capone, all the gangster stuff. That was his mindset. And he used to say, I wish I was this age in the 60s, because he had this fascination of running gangs and stuff like that. That was his mindset. And Darren didn't, if he could make money without working, he would, I can remember somebody knocking the door one time, years into the relationship, and giving Darren £1,000 just to sit in court for 2 hours to intimidate a witness. He also used to fox hunt and badger bait. He was extremely cruel to animals. I can remember one day going downstairs, because he used to keep hunting dogs down the bottom of the garden. And we probably had about 6, 7 dogs and terriers. And I can remember the one day putting the washing out the garden, and we had a wall in between where the dogs were and the top half of the garden, so it was separated. And I could hear a cat crying. So as I opened the gate to look behind, because that's where the sound was coming from, I could see a cat in a cage. So I ran up the stairs and I said to him, there's a fucking cat in a cage out the garden. You know, whose cat is it? What's going on? With that, he pushed past me. I can remember I can see him now stomping down the stairs in his budgie smuggler pants, going out the garden, and I knew exactly what he was going to do. I ran back in the house, I shut all the windows, I turned the telly up, because he chucked that cat in with the dogs. So for me, I knew that at that point, you know, that I was dealing with a psychopath, and he basically was a psychopath.
Once you get that realisation of the extent that he's willing to go to, both how he's violent towards you, but also you can see it with animals, what goes through your mind? What are you thinking at that moment when you kind of, it clicks, yeah, wow.
It's like, how long am I going to have to suffer this for, basically, you know? And we quite often had police coming up the house, and I can remember pulling up at the house in his Land Rover, and he said to me, oh, there's CID outside the house. And he tells me to get the tea on, so I'm starting cooking tea, and the door knocked. So he called me in to answer the door. So I went to the front door, and I opened the door, and it was these 2 guys, and I said, you know, can I help you? And he said, oh, is Darren there? So I opened the door and stood back so these coppers could look into our living room where Darren was sat. And I said, there he is. And they said, oh, can we come in? And Darren's shouting at these coppers from the sofa, saying, no, you fucking can't. Then the next thing then, it looked like the copper was going to make a step into the house. So Darren leapt up and went to the door, and I sort of stood back. And the copper said, well, can you come down? We want to talk to you. We're holding somebody in the cells who've been using your name. Will you come down and give a statement at your convenience? So I'm thinking, oh, I'm saying this in my mind, thinking, oh my fucking, at your convenience. So I'm thinking what's going on, but then also taking real notice of what this copper's saying to him. And he said, I'm having my fucking tea, I'll come down when I'm ready. And then the copper then went to put his foot in the door because Darren went to shut it. And as God as my witness, Darren said to the copper, get your fucking foot out of my door or I'll bury you in the bank. And the copper slid his foot out. And at that point, I knew I was on my own. So when the day came that I had to go, I knew that I was on my own. There was no fucking backup.
The police couldn't help in this.
They were scared of him. They were scared of him.
And am I right in thinking that he went to prison during the course of your relationship?
Yeah.
Why was he put in prison?
So one time when he was working for one of the supermarkets, and he was stealing contraband off his loads. And anyway, he got arrested for that. So they come and done a house search. And when they come and searched the house, they found an arsenal of weapons. So we had stun guns, CS gas, knuckle dusters, telescopic truncheons, and a 2.2 pistol.
How did you feel towards him at that point?
Towards the end, I hated him, absolutely hated him. And you know, and I say to victims, you know, you're there because you're too scared to leave. And I left when the fear of staying with him became greater than the fear of leaving him. You know, that was my turning point, but I absolutely hated him.
How long had you been together at the point that you hit that breaking point?
Yeah, so it was about 18 years, and it was the 9th of July, 2011, and we'd had an argument the night before, which resulted in him going off, and then he came back early as hours of the morning, and I literally locked him out. I put the lock on the door, and then he was banging the door, and Jack came in and said, oh, because he never called him Dad, he always called him Da. He said, oh, Dad's at the door. I said, oh, you better let him in because he'll kick it in. So Jack did let him in the house, and he slept down on the sofa. And then the following morning, which was the Saturday, I had to go and do hair for a wedding. And anyway, I went downstairs and he was on the sofa. And then I can remember going out the kitchen, sort of like tiptoeing out the kitchen, putting the kettle on. And then next thing then I can feel him breathing behind me. And I can't remember what he said, but then it was something like, oh, you're going to leave, are you? And I turned around, the Rachel from a child, and said, yeah, I fucking am going to leave. I've had a guts full of you. And as I walked from the back door into the living room, his hands come around my neck and he started really ferociously shaking and strangling me. And I can remember being on the floor in the living room, falling from the kitchen into the living room. And then the next thing then, I looked up and both my boys were there, Josh and Jack. Josh was doing a silent 999 call and Jack had a baseball bat. And I can remember then his grip loosened and then he looked up at the boys and almost shameful. I'm like, I'm so sorry, I'm sorry, I'm sorry, like that. And then both of my boys went back up to bed because this was like 7:30 in the morning. So then he was pulling me up the stairs by both of my hands and I couldn't break free. And as he pulled me around the side of his bed, he had a small bedside chest of drawers where all his weapons were kept. And he was trying to hold me and get a knife out of the drawer. So I managed to break free and he said, I'll do it, becoming the victim. And then the next thing then, Jack said, what's he doing? I said, go on, slit your wrist in front of your 16-year-old son, thinking that I would shame him and he'd just put it back in the drawer, I walked out the bedroom. By the time I got down the bottom of the stairs, Jack said, oh my God, Mummy's fucking done it. So at that point then, I thought, if he's capable of doing that in front of our son, what else is he capable of doing? I went straight to the solicitors, I filed for divorce, and I can remember her saying to me, right, we need 3 reasons for you to file for divorce. And I started reeling it all off. She said, whoa. She goes, we got enough, basically. In the end, I did. I went to the police station and gave a statement, and it was a long historical statement of the years of abuse. But I can remember, because your head is so frazzled, sitting outside the police station and phoning my friend, crying and saying, have I really been abused though? Have I really been abused? And she was like, oh my God, and then she started reeling stuff off. And I was like, and I was writing on a brown envelope on a bill, writing all the bullet points of different incidents that he'd done to me, so I could just sort of start the ball rolling. So I think it was about 18 pages long, this statement. It was huge. It kept going on and on and on. Anyway, they finally arrested him. As I said, charged him with common assault for the strangulation with a court date. He had bail restrictions put in place where he couldn't come within a 3-mile radius of the marital home. He couldn't contact either of the boys because they were potential witnesses. Bearing in mind, he breached that the very next day after being given it. I phoned the police and told them. It was a battle with the police. It was a battle with Darren. It was a battle all round, and you just don't know how you find the strength to keep going on. I mean, the breaches of the bail restrictions were just constant. And then I can remember being in work, and then I'd look out the window and he'd be sat there in the Land Rover for about half hour, 40 minutes. I'd phone the police and I'd say he's outside the salon. Well, what's he doing? I said, he's not doing anything, but he's been sat there for half an hour. I don't know what to do. Well, the thing is, he's not really breaking the law, so there's not a lot we can do. And then the police said to me, we want to come up and put a panic room in your house. And I was thinking, oh, right, okay. Didn't really know what this entailed until the van pulled up with the local Bobby van scheme. All the wood started coming out. So basically what they double skinned my bedroom door, either side. So it was like super thick. And then inside the bedroom, they put 2 brackets either side, and I had a metal bar that I had to put down in the night, and that was just in case he come to the home.
That's terrifying.
So it's like something out of a movie, innit? When I talk about it, it's like something you'd see on the telly, So the police can't protect me. The court system have failed me, but yet I've got to protect myself and lock myself in like a prisoner in my own home with a panic room. Friday the 19th of August. So this is the day after they put the panic room in place. So I went to work in the salon. It was only down the bottom of the hill. That wasn't my usual day to work, so I was covering a colleague's day off. So anyway, I went to work. But it was really strange because I had this knot in my stomach, and I've never experienced it before, and I've never experienced it since, and it was like a knot. So then I can remember then finishing a lady's hair, giving her a change back at the counter, and with that then, the shop went quite dark. It was almost like something was obscuring the sunlight shining in, and I thought it was a van. So as I looked to the door to see what was there, in the door frame is Darren. So he's filling the whole door frame. And I remember looking at him, and as he's pushing the shop door open, I can see a rucksack, and he's putting his hand in the rucksack, and as I'm looking, he's pulling out a gun, and I can see this sawn-off shotgun. And I don't know why, because they say we can freeze, fight, flight, friend, whatever. But I just ran towards him. And then I can remember just trying to get the gun off him, fighting with him for the gun. And I can remember saying, for fuck's sake, what are you doing, Thinker Jack? Fucking hell. And I'm fighting with him with this gun. I mean, I'm not much of a match because, the size he was. And then the next thing that I can remember being hit with the butt of the gun, I fell on the floor. The reception desk was over. Bear in mind, this was a Friday afternoon, busy salon. There was old ladies under the dryer, everything, it was just manic. It was carnage in there. Then the next thing that I can remember, Connie, one of the old ladies who was 93 on the floor, and she was shouting, I can remember so vividly shouting, go on, get out of here, to Darren. And then I can remember trying to pull the reception desk over me, which he kicked away. And then I said, for fuck's sake, Thinker Jack. And I had the presence of mind to pull my knees up under my chin, almost in a fetal position. And then he basically stood about 4 foot away from me. He pointed the gun to my chest, told me he loved me, and pulled the trigger. My left leg took the first blast of the sawn-off shotgun. And then the next thing, then I can remember looking at my jeans and thinking, oh my God, he's fucking shot me, because there was a huge hole in my jeans and there was this like orange liquid seeping out, and I can smell all the gunpowder. And then the next thing, then I can remember a real blast to the right of me, skimming past my head. I felt it. And then, I don't know why, I glanced to the left, and then this gun had been put down. So I remember grabbing the gun, and it was about that long, silver ornate engraving on it, real old looking thing. I remember grabbing the gun, and all I can say is I had some supernatural strength, because he could not get the gun off me, and he tried to get the gun off me. I held it with such force, it broke my finger, and I had a watch on that day, and the face of the watch was frosted in every direction. So there was this movement going on, and he couldn't get it off me. And then the next thing then I can remember, I felt a boot under the chin. He kicked and stamped all over me, punched me. I mean, he kicked the shit out of me. I mean, when I went to the hospital, I had 4 bruises of his fingers in my back. My left ear had to be slit 7 times because it was like a massive cauliflower ear. I had black eyes for 6 weeks, and the bruises almost travelled down my face and landed on my collarbone. I mean, he absolutely beat the shit out of me. The next thing then, he was gone. And then the next thing I can remember, one of the older ladies who said, how's it going? Because she apparently had run out when he came in and phoned the police in one of the other shops. And then she came back in when it was clear. And I remember putting a towel under my head and saying, "Now, come on now, don't you get going to sleep now." She said, "I need my hair done, But the adrenaline, obviously, when you're in that fight, flight, fear, friend, flop mode, I mean, all I wanted to do was sleep. I didn't feel any pain, nothing. All I wanted to do was sleep. And then the next thing I can remember, the police were there, and then the ambulance, and then I got taken off to hospital, and I can remember the police, armed police in the hospital, because they didn't know where he was, and they were all out looking for him, helicopters. And then I can remember about 7 o'clock at night, something like that, the police come in and said, "We have found him. He's taken his life. He's hanging from a tree." And I can honestly say to you, I did. I literally leapt in the bed and I said, "Fucking yes." And that was I didn't even think about my leg. I didn't think about any of my injuries. My thing was, I was free. I am free. there was massive breakdown in communication with Darren's family, who clearly blamed me for everything that had happened, and my family. Josh was still living at the home. Jack had decided to go and stay with Darren's family members, and I think he just wanted some sympathy for his father's death, which he couldn't fully get from my family, and that's no surprise there, even though they were trying to be as sympathetic as possible, because at the end of the day, even though Jack knew that his father was doing what he was doing to me, and he even said to me, if you don't leave him after a holiday one time, if you don't leave him and divorce him, you're an idiot. But it was still a massive shock of what, he done. And I think, being in an environment where a family, and we see this all the time, is blaming the victim. We see a lot of the victim blaming going on. And I just think he was just caught up with his emotions. He was 16 years of age, he was just caught up in everything, and he basically was just really traumatized by everything that had gone on. So his text messages to me went from, I'm praying for you, Mum, I'm praying for your leg, and stuff like that, to, it's all your fucking fault. So I knew what was happening. Yeah.
And what did happen after that?
So basically, I came out of hospital on Friday, the 23rd of September, and on Monday, the 26th of September, bearing in mind I hadn't seen Jack since the day of the shooting, and then I had a phone call from the police to ask me if I'd seen Jack at all over the weekend, and I said no, because obviously he was staying with his family, and they said, oh, okay, we're trying to locate him, and then I had a phone call then to say that basically he was missing. So I managed to get in the car, and I had my leg in a brace and everything else, and I shouldn't have even been weight bearing, but as a parent, my main concern was Jack at that point. And then I went looking for Jack in the car with my sister, and then I can remember my sister taking the phone call, I think, if I remember rightly, and there was a lady called Jackie on the phone, and it was Jack's best friend's mum, and she said they think they found him, they think he's hanging in the woods. And then I just knew, I sort of, in my spirit, I probably knew a couple of hours before that, and I don't know why. I just had a feeling that Jack wasn't going to be able to handle everything that had gone on.
And how old was he?
16. Yeah.
What were those days and weeks after you found out about Jack's death like?
It's almost like a blur. You wake up every morning and you think it's not real, and then all of a sudden reality slaps you in the face like a boulder. You just think, oh my God, this is real. This is my life now, and you just, it's like you're on a train, you just can't get off. You're on a ride and it's just going, whether you want to go with it or not. The damage that they do to children is unbelievable. And they are victims too. They're not witnesses. They are victims in their own right. It just affected everybody. His school friends, and funny enough, I seen the lady who phoned and said about they found Jack in the woods. I seen her the other day in Sainsbury's where she works, and I haven't seen her for a couple of years, but every time she sees me, she wells up. And she's like, oh, because her son James and Jack were like that, and to think he's 30 now and he's been in the RAF and stuff like that. And she said, she said, I remember when Jack's birthday, she said, I often think of Jack all the time, because he was always over there. So even like the community, everybody is affected by something like that. You've got to take control of the situation, or the situation will take control of you. And, it's so easy, and you can see how people can slip down that slippery slope of drugs, alcohol to numb the pain. And I was not going to do anything like that. And I think for me, looking back at the Rachel who was suppressed for years, she came back with a force and a fire burning in her belly. And I can remember reading my IPCC report, reading my serious case review, and thinking no other family, while I got breath in my lungs, will go through what I went through if I can help it.
As a survivor and now as a campaigner against domestic abuse, Rachel, what would you like to see changed?
All kids need to be educated on domestic abuse and violence, healthy relationships. Yes, I sit here as a female victim of a male perpetrator, but I have helped males by female perpetrators. You know, I'm not just saying this is a woman's problem, but the statistics show us that women are more vulnerable, and the statistics show us that violence against women and girls is massive. It's a national emergency. There's lots of things the government can do. They only got to speak to victims and survivors to get the answers. Because sadly, we're experts by experience in a club we didn't ask to be in. So put our voice to good use.
You obviously speak a lot to people that have experienced survivors of domestic abuse and coercive control. Why have you chosen to speak to perpetrators?
Years ago, it was funny because a chief superintendent asked me what we should do with perpetrators. And at the time, I said to him, and I meant it, I said, put a fucking bullet in them. But my view has changed on that now, because a few years ago, and it was during COVID, my friend Lynn was delivering a domestic abuse perpetrator program. So I'm looking at all these guys on the screen. There's probably about 12 boxes. Got different guys on there. There was one guy in a hotel room in a suit and tie. There was another guy. There was a, you know, you had every single possible character on this screen I could see by just looking at them. Anyway, I was on there for about 5 weeks, and I kept going on and listening, and I'd chirp in now and again, didn't say too much. And on the last session, I said, can I share my story with them? And she said, yeah, go on. So I said to these guys, I said, and they didn't know who I was. They weren't going to get a certificate for attending this program. So it wasn't like they were going to go to family court and say, oh, I've been a good boy, I've attended this course. So they said, yeah, you know, share your story with us. So I played the reenactment. And when we come back on screen, at least half of those men were crying. So I thought to myself, we could do something with these, because obviously they have got empathy and compassion. And I had other conversations, and then this one guy who was sat in a hotel room was sobbing. And he said, can I stay on? So we stayed on with him. And he basically said that my father was like this to my mother, and I'm repeating, it's a pattern. I said, yeah, it is. And he said, you know, will my kids be affected? I said, right, can you remember how you felt when your father was abusing your mother, when you could hear the crashing of the plates downstairs and the doors being smashed and stuff, you know, and your mother crying? He said, yeah. I said, well, that's exactly what will happen with your children. And apparently his wife contacted my friend some months after and said he's totally changed. So I think it's got to be a realisation for perpetrators, and they've got to realise and understand the damage that they are actually doing. You know, and I'd be more than happy to go into prisons and speak to perpetrators of abuse and say, you know, what happens in the end is that that person doesn't love you. They're just putting up with you because they can't see a way out. So do you really want to be with somebody that doesn't love you? They're just scared to leave you? You know, and your children as well, the damage you're doing to your children. Don't you want something better in life than that? And I think when we start looking at perpetrators and peeling back the onions, and this is absolutely no excuse, but there is some sort of trauma in their lives too. The sad thing is, with society today, I don't think we give, because we know men's suicides rates are huge, and I think we don't sort of look at a man and give them the ability and the space to be vulnerable and emotional. Doing the work I do, campaigning, making the difference. I've always been a chopsy cow. I always say I got more chops than a butcher's. But, you know, and I will hold people accountable. I will challenge government. I will challenge police officers. And the only way that they're going to learn is by listening to people like myself, those with the lived experience. And I feel privileged to do what I do. But there is life after domestic abuse and violence, and I'm testament to that.
Thank you so much, Rachel.
Thank you.
He looked young, he did look young, but it was after the marriage that I knew that he was twice my age. So I was 15, he was 30. I knew he was going to rape me, and that's what happened. And it became like every single day.